Some activists and organizations are nudging the city to bring its output of solid waste all the way down to zero. Part of the strategy is to expand recycling to include composting. Our guest is one of the supporters, the Zero Waste Project Director with the Conservation Law Foundation. We'd like to welcome Kirstie Pecci. And thank you very much for being with us, Kirstie.
Hi, Chris. Thank you so much for having me.
The first thing we have to explain here is why is it so important to get down to zero?
Well, first of all, the system we have right now is really expensive. The city of Boston right now is disposing of about 190,000 tons a year, and that's just residential solid waste. That costs the city about $70–80 a ton for tipping fees. That's a waste of money. We don't want to be spending $40 or $50 million a year disposing of waste. Also, that waste is going to incinerators right now. Incinerators emit dangerous pollutants, and we're losing the value of those goods. The embodied energy, the energy it takes, the water, the energy, the labor it takes to make food, we're not capturing anywhere near that when we burn that food. And then finally, one of the things that's most compelling to me is we need to be adding good compost made from our food waste to our soil, or we're not going to be able to grow food anymore. We need to be doing a better job when it comes to capturing the good resources in that food and making it into good, clean soil.
Is there any community where we're seeing this transformation happen already?
Yes. So the city of San Francisco has done a fantastic job with their composting, as well as their other zero waste programs, recycling and reducing their waste. Their diversion rate is about 80%. So 80% of what they're producing is not going into landfills or incinerators, and they've reduced their waste significantly too. The island of Nantucket, for instance, is no longer putting food waste in their landfill. Now they do some things with it that I don't think are fantastic. I'm very much opposed to the mixing of food waste with sewage sludge to process it, but it must be said that it's not going into the landfill. And even closer to home, the city of Cambridge started with a pilot program and now has got curbside composting for 25,000 residences in Cambridge.
Now, another thing a lot of us do is we just dump things down the incinerator, sometimes, out of sight, out of mind. What's wrong with that?
So the problem with the incinerator or the disposal systems at your sink are the same problem that I have with mixing food waste with sewage sludge when you process it. To back up a step, composting, traditional composting, is windrow composting when you are using air to process the food waste. And that process has become very modern and very quick in many ways, and it's fantastic. Another process is without air, anaerobic digestion. And that's a sealed tank in which you put your food waste in there, add some water, chop it up, and then that creates methane. The same way a landfill creates methane, only the anaerobic digester captures all the methane. So that's also a really good process, especially when you're in an urban area and you have a lot of food waste to process. What comes out the other end of that is not compost, meaning it's not a soil additive that you could just put on a farm, but it is a product that can be made into compost if you compost it in windrow composting for a couple weeks. What has happened is, unfortunately, many waste companies have tried to buy into this composting surge that we're seeing across the country. And the way that they're doing it is trying to mix sewage sludge, so taking care of another environmental problem, with food waste and process it in an anaerobic digester. So unfortunately, that's what they're doing in Nantucket with the food waste there. That's what the city of Cambridge's food waste, that's what's happening to it. It's going to a waste management facility. Waste Management, one of the biggest landfill companies in the world. And it's being slurried there. They're adding water to it, sending it to Lawrence, to the Greater Lawrence Sanitation District, and it's getting mixed with sewage sludge. So the problem is that sewage sludge, whether you're sending food down your drain or sending food into one of these anaerobic digesters that's also being mixed with sewage sludge contains any contaminant that you can think of, basically. So those 85,000 contaminants that are in our market are in that sewage sludge. Anything that's going down your toilet, anything that's going down the drain at an industrial facility is going to be in sewage sludge. So we've taken then a clean material, food, that can be composted and used as a soil additive to promote healthy growing, or a healthy field or ball field, whatever, and instead we're contaminating it irreparably. So we don't want to mix sewage sludge with food waste. Fine if you process it in composting, fine if you process it in an anaerobic digester, but not together.
This is BNN News, and we're talking with Kirstie Pecci from the Conservation Law Foundation. Kirstie, if we really did all this composting, produced all this reusable material, is there a market to absorb that, or we just have to subsidize it?
This is much cheaper than what we're doing now. So a tipping fee right now for composting is more like $25, $35 a ton. In other words, when you bring the sorted food waste to a facility, you're going to pay $25, $35 a ton to have them compost it. Landfilling, incineration, $70 to $80 a ton. So we're already saving money there. But one of the most important things to remember, Chris, when you're talking about food waste or any solid waste, is that the cheapest thing to do, the best thing to do for the environment is to reduce. So what we want to do is make sure that, for instance, at a school, we're not handing out food that we know the kids aren't going to eat. Right? Boston College has saved a tremendous amount of money by reducing their food waste. I mean, hundreds of thousands of dollars by reducing their food waste and changing their purchasing. So that's one of the things that we want to do is make sure upfront we're reducing. We don't want people to grow food that's not going to get eaten, for instance. We also want to make sure that we use the food to its highest and best use. So before we think about composting or anaerobic digestion or any other process, we want to feed people. So anytime we can rescue that food and get into the hands of people who are hungry, people who are food insecure, that's really important. And actually there's a food waste conference happening at Harvard Law School tomorrow and the next day, Tuesday and Wednesday, where that's one of the main issues is how do we reform our laws so that when you see something in your fridge, for instance, and it says sell by, you don't think you have to throw it away, right? You have to understand that it's still good, it just should be sold by that date. Like those kinds of labeling problems and laws preventing the donation and taxation of those donations, that's something we need to make sure we do a better job of up front.
Of course, another measure I'm sure you consider important is how much we would reduce the total solid waste stream if there were all this composting.
This is huge. This is immense. Food waste, to me, I look at it as not to make a joke, the low-hanging fruit. If we, first of all, compost, reduce, use our food to feed people and animals, and then compost the rest of it, we're going to decrease our waste stream by 30%. It's huge. So that's tremendous. It's the heaviest part of the waste stream, and also it's clean. There's no reason for us not to be doing a good job with this.
Now, I imagine, as with the other kinds of recycling, there's a period of resistance. I mean, I'm picturing my first brush with this, a bucket with orange peels and coffee grounds and banana. I mean, it was kind of gross. I mean, how do you get people to overcome that?
Well, it's really interesting because I think, first of all, that education piece is really important, and we want to make sure we do a good positive outreach. We want to make sure we do that at the very beginning with children in the classrooms, obviously. But also remember that food waste, that putrescible waste, is making all your trash really gross, right? So if you take that out, even in more densely populated areas where there are a lot of great restaurants like the North End, we can decrease the number of rats and other vermin by separating out our food waste and having that picked up more often. So while people have to get used to the idea, then if you start doing that and start thinking about it, we also find that people do a better job with their recycling and start to understand that plastic bags are not recyclable, start to think about each of the pieces of their trash because the gross part, that gummy part, has been taken out. So they're a little bit more comfortable mucking about with their recycling, and they do a better job with that sorting too. And then they start to look and say, what's left here? Why aren't these products designed the right way? How do we make that change? And that's where we need to go eventually, of course, is to have that requirement that if something isn't compostable, isn't recyclable, that it should be designed so it can be reused or designed so it can be recycled and composted.
The city is at least exploring this. What can you say so far?
I'm delighted with the progress that the City of Boston is making right now. This is happening at two different levels. The mayor's office has called for a zero waste planning process. They've hired some fantastic consultants, Amy Perlmutter and Associates, and some national experts like Ruth Abbey and Gary Liss, who are just absolute best in the country on these issues. And the process has had a series of public meetings. I know that people at the city, like Susan Casino, are going to neighborhood meetings. So if anyone sees this and has a neighborhood meeting coming up either this summer or early fall, contact the city's office and get them to come there, because Greenovate and Susan Casino's office are doing a fantastic job with this and doing this outreach. Once they have once the experts have evaluated what's happening in the city, and once the experts have done this outreach, then they're going to come back to the mayor's office with a plan. And then what needs to happen then, Chris, perfectly honestly, is there has to be investment, so there's enough staff to make that happen. That education piece that we were talking about, we have to make sure that's embedded in the plan and paid for. And then also, not only do we have to reform our residential recycling program and our residential composting program that the city is responsible for, we need to make sure that businesses, that the institutions and the industrial sector, that commercial sector, that those folks, that there's a requirement that they also recycle and compost at the city level. Because if we do that, if wherever you go, every park, every office, any public building you go to, if there is a recycling bin and a composting bin as well as a trash bin, that universal access will change how this happens and save all those businesses, all those institutions, and all those citizens a lot of money and create jobs. The job creation is 20 times as much as there in composting as it is in landfilling and incineration.
Now I hate skunks and seagulls ripping apart my trash as much as anybody, but how does a city pick up the compost material in a way that makes that scenario less likely?
Well, you've got to do it smartly, right? It's like anything else. And it's also easier to manage because it's contained in smaller containers. In other words, they can be picked up more often. And then, for instance, and you have to make sure there's lids on things, right? We know those seagulls can get into the bags. When you're talking about your food waste, the putrescible waste, that needs to go into a container with a lid. And what they usually use are liners that then can be, they're biodegradable and they get dumped every week. So cleanliness is important, managing the system is important, education is important. All those pieces making this change difficult on the ground in some ways, but the overarching policies and the money to be saved are so huge, and the environmental impact is so huge. Compost is actually a place where carbon is stored, right? So if we compost and spread that across the land, we're going to be decreasing our greenhouse gases, and we're going to be saving tremendous amounts of greenhouse gas outputs up front, because we're not going to be wasting that food. We're not going to be producing food that we're not using, and we're going to be capturing the value of it in our compost.
Finally, we should mention people want to find out some more or look forward to some kind of public hearing in this. Is there anything they should know?
Yes, you should definitely contact Councillor O'Malley's office. He's been leading on this, though any of the city councilors will know about it or are working on it. And also, Greenovate, which is handling the greenhouse gas and climate change efforts for the city, is also quarterbacking the citizen outreach on the zero waste planning process. So there will be a meeting on July 16th that the city is holding. They're doing a great job with these meetings. And also, if you are part of a neighborhood group, please make sure you reach out to a city, because they really want to be explaining this to you, and they need the public input to make this happen. This isn't going to happen just, because of activists like me or because of the people who work for the city. We need citizens to be involved in this, and I think everyone's going to be a lot happier once it's in place.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Well, thank you, Chris. Good to see you.
Kirstie Pecci from the Conservation Law Foundation.